Good morning, students. We continue with the introduction part of Orientalism. So, we were stressing on the last definition, the third definition of Orientalism, how Orientalism works as a discourse. So, we discussed how it is a Western style for dominating the Orient, how it works as a corporate institution by making statements, authorizing views, describing and teaching it, and settling it and ruling over it. We have discussed all these parts, and then we move to how Orientalism as a discourse limits our thoughts as well as on Orient. So we try to understand that without examining Orientalism as a discourse, we cannot actually understand how enormously systematic this discipline is, how Orient is produced politically, sociologically, militarily, ideologically, scientifically, etc. And then we move to the next part, the second part, how Orient is not a natural fact and but it is a man-made. We have looked into these factors as well. So Orient is not an inert fact of nature, just like Occident is not there, was not there, Orient is not there as well. It is something which is man-made. So Orient is basically an idea. So that is the essential meaning of this slide. So Orient is basically an idea, but it has a history and tradition of thought, imagery, vocabulary that gives reality and presence for that in the West. So these are the two geographical entities which support and it reflect each other. And now he moves to three qualifications. We have discussed these points. So he adds to the first point that Orient is essential an idea. He brings in one more qualification that Orient is an idea with a corresponding reality. There was a reality of people in East, so there is this brute reality associated with the East, which is being ignored. So they all these Westerners have made statements about the East, about the Orient, and these statements were created a kind of a consistency, and there was this regular constellation of ideas which made this Orient. And this process of Orientalizing did not happen accidentally. There is this relationship of power and domination of varying degrees of complex hegemony working behind it. So there is this configuration, the idea of configurations of power which works within the relationship of the Orient and Occidents is being discussed by Edward Said. And then he discussed this example, he gives out an example of power hierarchy. He discussed the representation of Kuchuk Hanum in the writings of Flaubert, how he, being a rich and powerful Westerner, spoke for Kuchuk Hanum, and, and in effect, it was the exhibition of his power status. He spoke for her and established her as a Oriental woman, and she did not have the freedom or to present her emotions and her part of history. And then we move to this point, like Orientalism is not just a structure of lies or myths. So if it was a structure of lies or myths, just a truth would have blown it away. But it is not like that. It is a created body of theory and practice in which for many generations there has been considerable material investment, and there has been this accepted grid for filtering through the Orient into Western consciousness. And these statements started proliferating out from Orientalism into general culture. And here he talks about the durability of Orientalism through hegemony. He takes up the idea of Gramsci. So he says that this Orientalism strength and durability can be explained in terms of Gramsci's notion of hegemony or cultural hegemony. So that is, this certain ideas become powerful or influential in a culture through consent. So we have looked to this fact. We have in the last class we discussed about this difference between civil society and political society, how culture works within civil society, and how civil society works through consent, while the political society works through what is known as direct domination or direct force. So we have discussed all these things. So it is this cultural hegemony which makes all these things seem natural, and it gives the power over the Orient to create to power to the Occident to create knowledge about the Orient. So you must understand that there is no history of England written by an Indian or Arab. You won't see an Indian or Arab writing the history of England. Why? There are many interpretations of historical interpretations of Indian nation. So it depends upon who has more power. So we see all kinds of knowledge generating produced about the Orient, that is linguistic, anthropological, historical, etc. Now we move to the next part. So we have discussed all these things till the last lecture. Now we move to the next point, pure knowledge versus political knowledge, which is a kind of an illusory dichotomy. So to show how Orientalism and knowledge are connected, Edward Said examines relationship between power and knowledge and between pure knowledge and political knowledge. So, according to Edward Said, there is this general consensus, general thinking that true knowledge or pure knowledge is fundamentally non political. So, there is this general belief that knowledge should be non political, scholarly, academic, impartial, and above small minded doctrinal ideology. And also, there is this assumption that writings on Keats or Wordsworth is non political, but writings on Russian economics is political. So, that kind of dichotomy existed, a general belief that certain things are pure knowledge and certain things are political knowledge. But here, tries to say that this assumption of existence of any pure knowledge existing without any bias, any partiality, or any taint is only a myth that does not exist at all. Something like pure knowledge does not exist at all. So, according to him, he says that it is very difficult to detach a writer or a scholar from the circumstances of his life, from the facts of his involvement with a class or a set of beliefs or a social position. So there is nothing like pure knowledge. അപ്പോൾ പറഞ്ഞു വരുന്നത് ഒരു റൈറ്റർ, ഇപ്പോൾ ഞാനാണ് എഴുതുന്നതെങ്കിൽ ഞാനൊരു ഇഫ് ഐ ആം ഗോയിങ് ടു റൈറ്റ് എ നോവൽ or a poem, it is said that definitely my set of beliefs, my social position, my circumstances of life will get reflected in what I write. Therefore, what I write will not be ever a pure knowledge. In that, my politics, my set of beliefs, my assumptions, my perspectives, my circumstances, my social position will be reflected. So, something like pure knowledge is a myth. There is nothing like writings on Keats will be something like a pure knowledge, and writings on Russian economics will be political. Everything is political. So here Edward Said quotes the examples like great liberal thinkers. So these are the liberal thinkers of that period. Thomas Mill, you may know, Thomas Carlyle. They always assumed this superiority of Europe. So even the works produced by Keats will not be pure knowledge, as all in all these people, empire was in the unconscious of their writings. So whenever they sit to write, they come up against the Orient as a European or American first, and then as an individual, later as an individual. So, no knowledge exists without the influence of politics or power. Every knowledge is political. So, this is being discussed in the third part of this introduction, third section. So, therefore, he argues that there is nothing like pure knowledge. All knowledge is political, but it is somewhat in different degrees, and especially all knowledge about India and Egypt is tinged with, is impressed with, is being violated by colonialism. So, a European or American studying the Orient comes up against the Orient as a European or American first, or as an individual second. So, all knowledge is being influenced by politics and power, and Orient is always the knowledge of the Orient is always political and seen through the prism of Orientalism. And he says that it was culture which created this interest in an Orientalist viewpoint, along with brute political, economic, and military power. So it is this culture, the cultural hegemony, that created this interest and which produced Orient in along with a brute political economy and military power. And now Edward Said goes on to expand his definitions on of Orientalism. So he addresses this question: why is Orientalism political? So he understands that in the first place, nearly every 19th century writer, and the same is true enough of writers in the early periods as well, they were very well aware of the fact of empire, that they are part of the empire, and it got reflected in their works too. For example, Thomas Mill, who wrote this work on liberty and representative government, here he made it clear that his views could not be applied to India. So he was talking about liberty, he was talking about representative government, but he made it clear that these views could not be applied to India because the Indians were civilizationally, if not racially, inferior. You must understand that Thomas Mill was an Indian office functionary for a great deal of his life. Even then, he believed that these views could not be applied to India because they are civilizationally inferior. So, that is why it is said that they were very well aware of the fact of empire. Even the progressive thinkers like Thomas Mill, Thomas Carlyle believed that. So, what about others? So, here he brings in, please take page number, just a second, page number 15, I guess. And please read the part from page number 15. Just a second. Sorry, page number 20. So here it is. Therefore, Orientalism is not a mere political subject matter or the field that is reflected passively by culture, scholarship, or institution, nor is it a large and diffuse collection of text about the Orient, nor is it representative and expressive of some nefarious Western imperialist plot to hold down the Oriental world. It is rather a distribution of geopolitical awareness into aesthetic, scholarly, economic, sociological, historical, and philological text. It is an elaboration not only of a basic geographical distinction, the world is made up of two unequal halves, Orient and Occident, but also a whole series of interest which, by such means as scholarly discovery, philological reconstruction, psychological analysis, landscape, and sociological description, it not only creates but also maintains. It is, rather than expresses, a certain will or intention to understand, in some cases to control, manipulate, even to incorporate what is a manifestly different or alternative and novel world. It is above all a discourse that is by no means in direct corresponding relationship with political power in the raw, but rather is produced and exists in an uneven exchange with various kinds of power, shaped to a degree by the exchange with power political, as with the colonial or imperial establishment, power intellectual, as with reigning sciences like comparative linguistics or anatomy, or any of the modern policy sciences, power cultural, as with orthodoxies and canons of taste, text, values, power moral, as with ideas about what we do, what they cannot do, or understand as we do. Indeed, my real argument is that Orientalism is and does not simply represent a considerable dimension of modern political intellectual culture, and as such has less to do with Orient than it does with our world. Because Orientalism is a cultural and a political fact, then it does not exist in some archival vacuum. Quite the contrary, I think it can be shown that what is thought, said, or even done about the Orient follows, perhaps occurs within certain distinct and intellectually knowable lines. Here too, a considerable degree of nuance and elaboration can be seen working as between the broad superstructural pressures and the details of composition, the facts of textuality. The most humanistic scholars, I think, perfectly happy with the notion that text exists in context. There is such thing as intertextuality, that the pressures of conventions, predecessors, and rhetorical styles limit what Walter Benjamin once called the overtaxing of the productive person in the name of the principle of creativity, in which the poet is believed on his own and out of his pure mind to have brought forth this work. So here he tries to say that Orientalism is consist of different configurations of power. So Orientalism is is being produced and exists in an uneven exchange with various degrees of power. He talks about power political, power moral, power intellectual, etc. So these are the different degrees of power which operates within Orientalism. So it is not just a distribution of geographical awareness which goes into the aesthetic, scholarly, or economic sociological text, but it is not just an elaboration at all. It consists of a whole series of interest. So that is the point. It is a whole series of interest by which all those scholarly discovery, philological reconstruction, psychological analysis, landscapes, and sociological distributions, which creates, which maintains, which gives out a or which produces an Orient politically, sociologically, militarily, etc. So it is that whole series of interest which brings out the Orient. So he tries to bring out the point that Orientalism is a political matter, but it is not just a political matter. It includes all these things. It includes the various degrees of power which operates within it, and how these writers, these people associated with these Oriental lands, uh, how they were very well aware of the fact of empire, and how these people produced literature, scholarship, social theory, and history about this land. And we can better understand the persistence and durability of this saturating hegemonic systems like culture. When we understand that these are though they were these kind of perspectives gave a kind of a internal constraints, it actually made them more productive rather than inhibiting them. So these kinds of uh, hegemonic structures like culture made them more productive rather than inhibiting them. So all these imperial politics encouraged these thinkers and writers to discuss and analyze Orient. But of course, they maintained what is known as internal consistency about generating that regular constellation of ideas. So basically, it came to the service of Orientalism's broadly imperialistic view of the world. So here, Edward Said is trying to lay out his framework to study Orientalism. So basically, this introduction part, he is trying to bring out a framework to study Orientalism. And he understands that to study Orientalism as a dynamic exchange between individual authors and the large political concerns shaped by the three empires, and these questions should be addressed. So these are the questions. So, the kind of political questions raised by Orientalism then are as follows. What other sorts of intellectual, aesthetic, scholarly, and cultural energies went into the making of an imperialist tradition like the Orientalist one? How did philology, lexicography, history, biology, political and economic theory, novel writing, lyric poetry come to the service of Orientalism's broadly imperialist view of the world? What changes, modulations, refinements, even revolutions take place within Orientalism? What is the meaning of originality, of continuity, of individuality in this context? How does Orientalism transmit or reproduce itself from one epoch to another? In fine, how can we treat the cultural historical phenomenon of Orientalism as a kind of willed human work, not of mere unconditioned ratiocination, in all its historical complexity, detail, and work, without at the same time losing sight of the alliance between cultural work, political tendencies, the state, and the specific realities of domination? Governed by such concerns, and a humanistic study can responsibly address itself to politics and culture. But this is not to say that such a study establishes a hard and fast rule about the relationship between knowledge and politics. My argument is that each humanistic investigation must formulate the nature of that connection in the specific context of the study, the subject matter, and its historical circumstances. So, this entire paragraph brings out the framework he want to give for this entire text titled Orientalism. So, these are the questions this Orientalism is going to study. So, how these different types of energies, cultural energies, aesthetic energies, intellectual energies made this imperialist tradition, and how all these different disciplines like philology, history, biology, economic theory, even novel writing, lyrical poetry helped Orientalism's imperialist view of the world. And he wants to study about the changes, modulations, refinements that take place within Orientalism. So he is trying to understand that Orientalism is a kind of a will, that is something like a forced human work. And he wants to study its historical complexity and details, and without losing sight, without ignoring the cultural work, political tendencies, and all those specific realities of dominations. But he is not trying to give out a hard and fast rule about this relationship between knowledge and politics. So he is trying to give out a humanistic investigation to understand the nature and connection, nature of connection in the in this specific context of study, to understand the subject matter and to understand its historical circumstances. So we have reached the final part of the essay. Now he will try to give out all those devices he bring out to understand Orientalism in the next part. So I repeat, please read the textbook if you have any doubts. If you have any doubts regarding this lecture, please message me. So thank you, girls. Have a nice day.